After arguably the most dominant performance over a season in Formula 1 history from Red Bull and Max Verstappen, there was little excitement about the sport's near future going into 2024, especially given that the regulations were to stay pretty much the same for 2 more seasons. And even in the first part of the season, it seemed like we were gonna witness another one-sided affair. But as the other teams caught up, we ended up having a pretty exciting season overall, not to mention all the drama that happened throughout the year. This was also backed with quite a few stats which require us to go way back in Formula 1 history to find anything comparable. Of course, many of them will be skewed by the sheer fact that there were a record-breaking 24 races this season, so I'll try to contextualize these stats by giving the race count in the seasons I mentioned, or by some other way wherever it's relevant. So with that, let's get started with how the championship standings unfolded. The main characteristic of the 2024 season was obviously the volatility at the top. Taking a look at the standings in the first and second halves of the season somewhat illustrates this. We can even shift the cutoff point to after the first 10 races when Verstappen stopped winning. Or even break the season into 3 8-race chunks to up our cherry-picked stats game. I've instead looked at the 5-race rolling sums of the drivers and the teams to see their form based on their results. You get quite a good sense of the trends over the season looking at this graph, like how much Verstappen was in the back foot, especially just before and after the summer break, Hamilton's rise and fall in form, conversely Leclerc's late resurgence, and of course how hard Perez fell off. I mean, he was even struggling to collect points at all towards the end of the season and tumbled all the way to 15th in terms of form. 5 drivers had the most points at different points of the season based on the 5 most recent Grand Prix: Verstappen, Hamilton, Piastri, Norris, and Leclerc. On the team side, Red Bull started the season in dominant fashion, and McLaren seemed to have the strongest car for the majority of the mid part of the season. Then, Ferrari finished the season strongly, and even Mercedes had a stretch of races where they appeared to be the fastest. And all 4 teams at the top had a point in the season when they had the highest 5-race rolling sums. Red Bull was competing with Mercedes for much of the second half of the season in terms of points gained in the last 5 races, and ended it last among the top 4. Both McLaren and Ferrari had massive comebacks during the season. Red Bull had a gap of 115 points to McLaren after the first 6 races, and Ferrari were trailing McLaren by 75 points after round 18. Both of these would have been the biggest comeback in terms of the absolute points difference, obviously, with the changed point system. But let's look at some of the other biggest comebacks in history relative to the points awarded for winning a Grand Prix. Williams overturned a 36-point deficit to Benetton with 9 races to go to become the constructors champions in 1994, which equated to 3.6 times the points awarded for a win. The comeback was massively helped by Schumacher's exclusions and race bans, and the second seat at Benetton being a revolving door through parts of the season. Other notable comebacks include 1982 and 85, when Ferrari and McLaren came back from 21-point deficits, and the 1979 season, when Ferrari overcame a 24-point deficit to win the Constructors' Championship comfortably. 2024 was also only the 3rd time in history that the Drivers' Champions team finished 3rd or worse in the Constructors' Championship, with the last time this occurring being all the way back in 1983. Nelson Piquet's teammate Riccardo Patrese in the 2nd Brabham managed to finish only 5 of the 15 Grand Prix and scored points on only 2 occasions. A 3rd place in the German Grand Prix and a win in the final race in South Africa meant that he collected a grand total of 13 points to Piquet's 59, and the team finished the season 3rd, behind both Ferrari and Renault. Patrese finished the Drivers' Championship in 9th that year, only 1 spot worse than Perez's 8th place finish this year. Interestingly, the only other time this happened was just the year before, when Williams only managed to finish the Constructors' Championship in 4th, when their driver Keke Rosberg went on to become the world champion. Ferrari seemed to have an edge on the competition, but the fatal accidents of both of their drivers Villeneuve and Pironi meant that they couldn't complete the season with a double. On Williams' side of things, the second seat was a revolving door at the start of the season after the unexpected retirement of Carlos Reutemann, and Derek Daly, who ran the majority of the races, only managed to finish the championship in 13th. 2024 also saw the fewest wins for a constructors champion since Ferrari in 1999. That season had 8 fewer races though, so Ferrari won 38% of the races in 99, whereas McLaren won only a quarter of the races. Looking at the ratio of wins to the total number of races, there are only 2 seasons where the constructors champion had a lower percentage. Ferrari in 77 with 4 wins out of 17 Grand Prix, and again Ferrari in 82 with only 3 wins out of 16 races. So McLaren had 6 wins and Red Bull had 9, which meant that McLaren became the first team to win the Constructors' Champion with 3 fewer Grand Prix victories than a rival team. Previously, the champion constructor had 2 fewer wins than a competitor twice. Mercedes in 2021, when they had 9 victories to Red Bull's 11, and Renault in 2005, when they had 8 wins to McLaren's 10. Looking at this from the other side, it must be quite rare to see the team with the outright most wins to come only 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. In fact, it was the first time. Previously, Renault finished 3rd with the highest number of wins in 1982. However, they were tied with the 2nd placed McLaren with 4 victories apiece. Similarly, Lotus finished 3rd despite having the most wins in 64, but were tied with champions Ferrari at 3 wins each. With both Norris and Piastri achieving their maiden wins this year, McLaren became the first team since 1962 to secure the Constructors' Championship with a driver lineup that started the season with no wins. BRM became the champion that year with Graham Hill and Richie Ginther as their drivers. But I should add that only the best finish of the teams at each Grand Prix were considered, and only the points from the best 5 of these results counted towards the championship. So quite different times indeed. And this, I guess, is a good segue to mention some stats on wins. 7 drivers bagged victories in a season for the first time since 2012, when we had 8 different winners. And speaking of 2012, when the season kicked off with 7 different winners in the first 7 races, there was a stretch of races when we had different winners for 6 races this season, from Baku to Las Vegas. And of course, one of the most popular stats was that all 7 race winners this year scored multiple race victories, which happened for the first time in history. The record for this was previously 6, which was set during the 1981 season when there were only 15 races. The champion Nelson Piquet and Alain Prost both had 3 wins, while Carlos Reutemann, defending champ Alan Jones, Jacques Lafitte and Gilles Villeneuve all had 2 wins each. The 4 teams at the front won at least 4 races in 2024, another first in Formula 1 history. This was obviously massively helped by the minimum number of races needed to achieve this being 16, so this could only have even been theoretically possible since 1976, and in only 45 seasons. Previously, 4 teams had at least 3 wins on 2 occasions, with the most recent occurring 47 years ago in 1977. Out of the 17 races, Lotus won 5 times, while both Ferrari and McLaren had 4 wins, and Wolff won 3 times. And the first time this ever happened was not long before, in the 15-race-long 1974 season, when McLaren had 4 victories, and Ferrari, Lotus and Brabham all had 3 wins each. The remaining 2 races of the season were won by Tyrrell, giving an almost perfect split of wins between the 5 teams. This was also the only time apart from 2010 that 3 teams had at least 5 victories in a season, and it was the same 3 teams. Red Bull had 9 Grand Prix wins and Ferrari 5 once more, but this time McLaren had 6 wins. With the Mercedes double at Las Vegas, the top 4 teams all achieved a 1-2 finish this season, which was a first in F1 history unless we count the 1960 season, which admittedly is quite a stretch. And not just because of the lack of 2-car limits for teams back then. Cooper, Ferrari and Lotus scored 1-2 finishes. Even though they were driving the same car, the Lotuses of Stirling Moss and Innes Ireland belonged to two different teams. Moss was driving for a privateer team using the Lotus car, while Ireland was driving for the Works team. Not only that, the fourth team to complete this stat was a team called Watson, who finished 1-2 in the Indy 500 in the last year of the event, being part of the Formula One World Championship. Verstappen had a winless run of 10 races, the longest for the Drivers' Champion since Jenson Button failed to finish at the top step of the podium for the final 10 races of the 2009 campaign. There are only 2 seasons in history when the champion had a longer win drought. Nelson Piquet in 1983 with 11 races in a row without winning, and Keke Rosberg the year before with 13 consecutive non-win results, when he famously went on to become champion with only a single race victory. Despite Verstappen's dominant run in the first 10 races, no driver scored 3 wins in a row, a first since 2010. And more notably, no team scored 3 wins in a row for the first time since 2010 as well, and only for the second time in 23 years. We've had no driver winning 2 in a row for the last 15 races ever since the Spanish Grand Prix. The most recent streak of races of similar length with no driver winning 2 in a row spanned 2 seasons. There wasn't a repeat winner for 15 races from the 2012 Indian Grand Prix all the way to the Belgian Grand Prix next year. Of course, that streak ended with Sebastian Vettel winning 9 on the trot to close off the 2013 season and the V8 era. If we were to look at streaks within a single season, we'd have to go back more than 40 years to 1982. When no one won 2 in a row in the last 15 races. And more remarkably, the 1974 campaign had no driver winning 2 races in a row for the entire 15-race-long season. The fight for the best of the rest was quite entertaining too, as the midfield teams had a season full of ups and downs as well. Aston Martin started off the season very strongly, and the points they earned in the first half led them to a comfortable 5th place finish in the standings. However, similar to Red Bull, they fell back in terms of form quite drastically. RB seemed to be the first team to compete with Aston Martin for the best of the rest title, but it was Haas who racked up points more consistently throughout the season to overtake RB for 6th in the constructors standings. Then Alpine's late push, seemingly out of nowhere, with 2 incredible weekends, meant that they snatched 6th place right in the end. And Alpine's weekend at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix deserves special recognition. With this result, 5 teams ended up scoring a double podium finish for the first time since 1979, when Ferrari, Williams, Ligier, Lotus and Renault all had a double podium result. Moreover, the French team scored 35 of their 65 points in a single weekend, which amounts to 54% of their full season tally. It's quite difficult to compare and make a record out of this with the changes in the point system over the years, and of course outliers such as a team completing the season with a single point and, score 100% of their points in one race. But still, it has to be one of the most impactful race results for a team. There have been weekends where teams scored a reasonable chunk of their season points total in recent memory, such as Alfa Romeo at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix, Force India at the 2009 Belgian Grand Prix, or even Jordan at the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. However, none of these races had an impact on the team's finishing position in the standings. The last time a constructor leapfrogged rivals to this extent in the closing stages of a season was in the penultimate race of 2003 in the US, when both Saubers came home in the top 5. Frentzen finished 3rd and Heidfeld 5th, earning the team 10 of its 19 points over the season and taking them from 9th all the way to 6th in the standings. They even went up to 5th following the US Grand Prix, but BAR Honda managed to pass them back in the season finale. An even better example for this has got to be the one from 1994 though, when a French team scored a double podium with their 2 French drivers in a race to go up in the standings. Ligier climbed up 5 spots in the constructor standings after failing to score a single point in the first 8 races of the season and scored a whopping 77% of their season total of points in a single race. And onto a couple of miscellaneous stats to wrap up the video. More drivers scored points than there are race seats available for this season, and in fact, a total of 21 drivers scored points for the 3rd season in a row. At the Belgian Grand Prix, George Russell became the first driver since Sebastian Vettel in 2019 to cross the checkered flag first, but be denied the win, and the first since 1994 due to a technical infringement when Michael Schumacher was disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix due to the rear skid block thickness being below the minimum threshold. Piastri became the 4th driver in history to complete every lap in a season, even though he got very close to being lapped in Abu Dhabi, and the first to do so without being crowned the champion. Even though the fight for the Drivers' Championship was never that close, 3 teams battling it out for the Constructors' title, and a 4th one joining on occasion, meant that we had one of the most fun seasons in recent memory, not just in terms of viewing experience, but also in terms of some wacky stats. And I'm sure you can dig deeper to find even crazier and more cherry-picked stats from this season, so let me know in the comments below. I made a video on Ligier's double podium result at the 1994 German Grand Prix recently, so make sure to check that one out too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.